Good to be here with all of you again. And I just want to say that I'm actually just recovering from COVID. I got COVID about 4 days ago, and so if my voice is a little bit rusty and my energy is a little bit down today, it's because I'm still a little bit tender. But the good news is that this is really giving me, a really good opportunity to talk about Dukkha, because there's been some Dukkha. So today we're going to explore the second of the three characteristics, which is, the characteristics of Dukkha. And last month, can I just get a sense with hands in the air, how many of you were here in January? Okay, so all of you basically is what it looks like. Most of you were here last month. But as you then recall, we were exploring impermanence, in Pali language, Anicca, which is often considered the first of the three characteristics. And then Dukkha is often considered the second of the three characteristics. So often we translate this to suffering, but in the Pali language, it's called Dukkha. But before we sort of dive a little bit deeper into me sharing a whole lot, I think I said this last time, my preferred way of sharing Dhamma is actually to have much more of a conversation. Because again, as I talk, it's hard for me to know, what comes up for you, what reflections you have, what thoughts you have. And so I always feel like I'm sharing into a space and not really knowing what's landing and what's of use to you. But I do want to encourage you all to listen in a way that really supports your practice. So don't try to feel like you have to understand every single thing. I want to encourage you to trust that if you can listen, especially from within your body, in a more meditative way, that whatever is appropriate for you to take home today, that will land. You don't have to try to remember all of it or understand all of it, but you can trust that just more listening from an embodied sense, that this will be the best way for you to listen to the Dhamma today. So that's the encouragement. So as I said, we often translate Dukkha to the English word suffering, but it might be useful for us to talk a little bit more about the root word Dukkha and the original meaning of the word Dukkha. And again, I'm not a Pali scholar, so I can't study the Pali language myself and understand the language myself. But so this is really based on what I've heard from some of my own teachers about the word Dukkha. So the word Dukkha is supposed to be, in some ways, two words. So whereas the first part, du, is best translated as bad, ka can be translated as empty or hollow space. So when we put these two together, the word Dukkha in some ways refers to an empty or hollow space, or a bad, empty, hollow space. So this is kind of interesting to have that translation a little bit different than the usual suffering. So some teachers have actually suggested that we can think about Dukkha as a sense of lack or a sense of painful emptiness. This constant sense that our life has this undertone of voidness or lack, that even though we can find many pleasures in life, and there are many beautiful things, but we always there's always this undertone of this sense of lack, of this sense of voidness, of this sense of hollowness that we can't fill or we can't get rid of, no matter how much we try. And I think often we do try, so often there's a masking of this level of Dukkha, of this level of hollowness. Because we fill our time so well, we have all our devices, we keep ourselves really busy, and so often we don't really touch into this deeper sense of life as having this basic hollowness. Another typical or well-known translation of Dukkha has been to think about it as a badly fitting empty axle hole of a wheel. Some of you may have thought of this or may have heard of this. So if we think about the old carts at the time of the Buddha, if they were all wooden, right, and if the axle didn't fit well in the hole, it would really give us a very, very bumpy ride. So dukkha could be translated as this sort of bumpy ride through our human condition, through a human life, that we can never really get into a smooth ride. There'll always be this inherent sense of bumpiness that comes along with being a human. So hopefully this doesn't sound too depressing for you, because in some ways, actually seeing this with more clarity is a way for us to move into to greater freedom and more peacefulness. But in some ways, we have to see this first before there can be a release from dukkha. So I think often when we hear the word suffering, or when we hear the word dukkha, often we think about the much more overt types of dukkha that we may experience, so maybe a loss of a friend, or a loss of a job, or getting sick, or any type of more acute types of suffering. That's often what we think about when we hear the word dukkha. But again, as I said, this translation as dukkha, as a bad, empty space, really points to this much more existential layer of dukkha, and this is what the Buddha is pointing us to recognize and to look at, and to not be oblivious to in his teachings. So the Buddha really said many, many things about dukkha, and I won't be able to mention all of the important things he said about dukkha, but I do want to highlight two important things that are really essential to our understanding of dukkha and the freedom from dukkha. And he said that dukkha is to be recognized, first of all. And then he also said that not seeing dukkha is dukkha in itself. So it's actually in that simple recognition of this is a moment of suffering, this is what suffering feels like, that we might be able to release the suffering that we feel around life. In that moment of recognizing suffering as suffering, in some ways there's the possibility of us stepping out of our identification with the suffering, our entanglement with the suffering, and in that clear seeing of this is dukkha, this is what the Buddha talked about, there might be this natural letting go of the suffering that we feel. But most often we actually don't recognize dukkha for what it is. So we may very well be aware that, right now in this moment, there is some pain arising in my experience. This is an unpleasant moment. I'm not feeling well. Something really difficult happened. So we can definitely name that most often. But most of the time we feel that it's very connected to that particular situation. It's very situational. So often we feel that, it's because this happened, or that happened, or this person did this, or I was unlucky here, or something really unusual or bad happened, and this was the cause of this moment of dukkha. And in some ways, we are then not seeing that that when there's dukkha, it is not unnatural. It is not a mistake that dukkha happens. So I hope this makes sense to you, that we, there's some experience of dukkha, and right away it's like, okay, it must be because of this and that, and then we don't see that, actually this is what happens. This is part of life. There is this dukkha that we can experience anytime. So underlying this this way of seeing dukkha as just a mistake, just like this this shouldn't be happening, or something is wrong here, someone is to blame, or I did something wrong, or this was really unlucky that this suffering is here. There is this belief, this core belief, this delusion, as the Buddha talked about, that suffering should not be happening, and that somehow it's not supposed to be part of life. And then when it does happen, we feel that it needs to be fixed, and we need to do something about it. And so rather than sort of recognizing dukkha as a core feature of life, rather than just saying, okay, when illness hits you, when you have a loss, when something difficult happens, it is not outside of what happens in our human experience. It's not an unnatural event. This is what happens as part of our human life. We really try to solve it and get rid of it, and this is often how we get in trouble with dukkha, is all our attempts to try to solve it and manage it and get rid of it. And so there's all of these different layers of suffering that can happen for us. So as I shared initially, I'm just recovering from COVID, and my brain is just a little bit foggy as a result. And I just had my own personal experience of not recognizing dukkha and getting entangled in efforts of trying to control my experience. So when I got sick about 4 days ago, I was actually part of the teaching team at Spirit Rock, and was really looking forward to it, and had planned it for months, and was so excited to finally be there. And then one day I just started feeling unwell, and said, oh, okay, no, it can't be COVID. I've tested, I've been so careful, I've been wearing a mask, this couldn't be happening. And then sure enough, I took a test, and it actually was COVID. And it was so interesting just to watch the mind being in total disbelief about this happening. There's been all of this time, all of these months of not getting COVID, and beginning to feel that it wasn't going to happen to me. That somehow I was exempt from COVID. So again, I could just watch my mind be in such disbelief when the test was showing positive, and then watching the mind go through, what went wrong here? What did I do wrong? What did someone else do wrong? How could this happen? And just searching for reasons why this was going on, why this was happening. And again, just seeing how much entanglement the mind got in through all these efforts to not accept it, and try to understand it, and try to reject the reality of what was happening. And then at some point realizing, okay, this is dukkha. Kristina, you're really caught in dukkha here. You are fighting reality. These bodies are frail. We're all subject to illness. It can happen anytime to any one of us. And when it happens, the more we resist that, and the more we fight that, and the more we reject that, the more we get entangled in it, and the more we suffer around that truth of this inherent vulnerability of life. So in that moment of then recognizing, feeling really entangled, feeling really stuck, recognizing this is dukkha, there was this release of all the ways that I wasn't accepting the dukkha. And then at some point, being able to then decide, what is the best action to take here? What can I do now in this situation where there's actually COVID? And probably most of you have have had similar experiences of fighting some aspect of reality at some point in your life, maybe illness or maybe something else, and being in a lot of resistance, a lot of denial. I don't want this to be happening. What's wrong here? This shouldn't be happening. And then at some point realizing that all the resistance you're having to that particular experience, that's actually causing way more suffering for you. And then maybe feeling that relief that comes when there is an acceptance of, okay, this is what's happening. This is what's true in this moment. There's actually nothing wrong here. This is just what can happen when you have a human body and mind. So as we talked about last time, the three characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and not self are actually much more like facets of the same diamond. So once we see one of the characteristics clearly, for sure we will also see the other characteristics as part of that. It's just that one of them might be very clear to us, but as we recognize dukkha, we will also be knowing impermanence and not self as part of that. They always come together. But I just wanted to talk a little bit more about how anicca and dukkha are connected. So first of all, as we talked about last time, because everything is impermanent, because everything is in a constant state of flux and change, there is this inherent dukkha in our conditioned existence in this human life. So because everything is in flux, everything is moving and changing all the time, we really cannot find any solid ground anywhere. We cannot, as we talked about last time, I think with the sandcastle, because our experience is made of sand, we cannot build a lasting sandcastle. It is in the nature of that sandcastle to fall apart. And this is sort of that inherent quality of dukkha in our existence. So this is the dukkha that can best be described as this bad emptiness or this hollowness that we talked about initially. And then again, secondly, because we resist this truth of change and the inherent unsatisfactoriness that comes with this state of flux, we suffer again because of this belief that it should be otherwise. It should not be so, and something is wrong when dukkha is happening. This is not how it's supposed to be. And as we talked about, we try to control our experience because of this belief that it shouldn't be like this, pushing away what it is that we don't want and clinging to the things that we do want as an effort of trying to build some kind of refuge, build some kind of solid place where we can feel more secure. So one way of talking about the difference is the difference between the pain level of life and the suffering level of life. So again, just by the fact that we have these human bodies and minds, there will be this underlying potential for pain. It's really deeply ingrained in all of our conditioned existence, and this is really that basic pain level that comes with having a human nervous system, with having a human attachment system, with having a human mind, with having a human body. That there is always this potential for pain to be here. And then the suffering level, again, as we have talked about, is this reactivity around the pain level. Again, this sense of we don't want it to be like this, and we really want to try to manage reality by avoiding how things are and clinging to what we want. So in some ways, a lot of our work with dukkha and with this path is learning to accept and recognize the pain level, which is actually much harder than it sounds, because a lot of the time we are really in some level of denial around this, thinking this actually should be different. This shouldn't be like this, and as we come into greater alignment with this is the nature of our life, then there can be this letting go of the suffering level. So in some ways we can't change the nature of our existence, of our life, but we can change our relationship with this truth, and how we are with the truth of impermanence and with suffering. That's really the piece that we can work on with this practice, and that's where we come into greater and greater alignment with the way things are. And again, this may sound really, initially this may sound depressing. Do I really have to open to dukkha and open to the truth that that there is this inherent pain of existence? But the actual experience is a much greater ease with the way things are. And again, I'm thinking all of you have had some experience with that. If you can just think about, again, the relief you might have felt when there's been a letting go of some kind of reactivity you've had, some kind of non-acceptance you've had, and then the peacefulness that comes along with that. And I think we talked about this last time. There might be a grieving that happens when we let go, of the way we want things to be, and we understand, okay, this is the way things are. There might be some grieving that comes along with that. And yet, if we really tune into that process of the letting go, often there is this deeper peacefulness that we start to experience around it, which actually starts to grow more and more and more and spread out in more and more areas of our lives. So recognizing dukkha doesn't have to be felt as personally painful. I just want to say that recognizing dukkha can actually really lead to a deep sense of peace and a deep sense of well-being. So feel free to move around, and you don't have to sit totally still. I know it's a lot of information, and again, this invitation for you to take in as much of this as is of use to you, and again, let the rest go. I know from training as a Dhamma teacher that most Dhamma teachers don't want to give the dukkha talk because again, it can be really difficult information to take in. So I just want to acknowledge that this is a Saturday morning, and you just probably all had a lovely sit, and here I am popping into your space and then giving you all of this information about dukkha and about the nature of existence. So again, just to titrate and let yourself take in as much of this as is useful, and again, let the rest go. It won't be the last time that you'll be hearing about this. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the process of deepening our understanding of dukkha, and how that deepening of understanding of dukkha can lead to a deepening letting go and a deepening sense of freedom, the freedom and peace that the Buddha was referring to, was talking about. So often, sort of the first level, when we hear about dukkha and we start to sit down and explore our own bodies and minds, again, we may start to recognize these moments of dukkha, these moments when we are caught in some kind of tangle, and we start to see, when I when I resist the way things are, when I don't want things to be a certain way, when I don't want experience to be a certain way, I actually get to experience more suffering. I get to experience more pain. So we start to see this pattern in our own experience, in our meditation practice, and also outside of the cushion. We really start to notice that that the more we resist the way things are, the more we tend to suffer. And this is often talked about as seeing the tangle. The Buddha often talked about suffering as a type of a tangle. And I think that image is really good, because if you think about a tangle, the way we often relate to a problem in our life is that we attack it from all different kinds of directions, and we pull in all the edges of the tangle. And the more we pull at the tangle, the more tight it gets, and the less possibility we have of solving the problem, of releasing the tangle of suffering. And so the invitation really is for us to, when we see, okay, here's a tangle, I'm caught in a tangle, in that moment when we can recognize, oh, this is the dukkha that the Buddha was talking about, this tangle can start to release a little bit. And once it releases a little bit, and we have a bit more clarity by saying, okay, this is a moment of being really caught, of being really entangled, we might much better be able to then decide, how do we actually support this tangle in untangling. But again, often we do the exact opposite. We pull at all the corners, and it gets to be really tight for us. So in our own practice, we may start to notice how we get entangled more and more, and we start to notice that when we drop our reactivity around what's happening, what's going on, the pain we're feeling, then there's this immediate relief of suffering that we feel. We start to feel that moment of peacefulness that comes from a moment of letting go. We see more and more of those moments in our practice. And then over time, all of these moments of insight into our own personal ways of getting entangled, of getting wrapped up in suffering, we start to see that this is actually much more of it has much more of a universal quality. It's not just my dukkha, my entanglement. We begin to really see that that this patterning of how we as humans relate to pain, by trying to resist it, by trying to solve it, by trying to get rid of it, that is really a shared human experience that we all engage in until we are fully liberated. We all have this way that we try to deal with this pain level of our experience, and so we start to see that that in some ways that this is much more of a global pattern. We start to see the lawfulness of dukkha and understand the dukkha nature of this pattern. In the Mahasi tradition, this is called, and for some of you this may be not useful information, but for some of you this may be useful information. In the Mahasi tradition, which we often teach from in at the insight meditation places around in the Western world, this is called inferential insight, and this really means that when our personal insights, and when we start to begin to see that these are not just personal insights, but this is a lawfulness of how we all are in this life, we can again, as I said, see this much more as a global pattern. And when we start to see it much more as a global pattern, this insight starts to get much deeper into our bones, meaning that before we even try to resist reality, before we even try to resist, this shouldn't be so, I don't want this to be happening, I don't want to be sick now, I don't want to experience this loss now, it shouldn't be like this. Because we have really deepened our insight into dukkha, and our understanding that the way we resist things actually leads to more suffering, to more dukkha, we begin to live with much more balance and much more and much less reactivity. So some of our usual patterns of reacting to reality actually starts to ease off. They start to fall away, not completely, but they start to become less and less and less, so that we don't end up in a real battle with how reality is. So there's a poem by Portia Nilsson that I think illustrates this process of understanding this pattern of dukkha in a more global way that I'd like to share with you. So again, you can just sit back and listen. So it's got 5 chapters. So the first chapter is, I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find my way out. Chapter 2. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time for me to get out. Chapter 3. I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Chapter 5. I walk down another street. So again, this is just, I think a beautiful illustration of when we really see these patterns of suffering in our own lives in a deeper and deeper way. At some point, we actually don't even walk down that same street where we fall into that hole. So although we begin to feel a deeper balance, a deeper equanimity, a deeper acceptance of the way things are, and we feel some peace around that. We don't suffer as much. We don't suffer that second layer so much because we don't get caught so much in reactivity and in battling with the way things are. We begin to feel this a little bit more ease, a little bit more well-being as this path progresses. We just don't walk down that street where that hole is so much anymore. But we do begin to touch into the fact that that there is no ground here. There is ultimately nothing satisfying in this life anymore, because everything is in flux. And again, this is really the Buddha pointing us towards the unconditioned. So I won't get into this too much today, but just to say that this is sort of that that deeper level of insight into dukkha, and we begin to see that that there really is no resting place. There's no place we can find a permanent sense of peace, because everything is conditioned. So we may not have a lot of overt suffering, but we feel deep in our ground that there is nothing in this human condition that we can rest on, that we can rely on, and this is called the deeper insights into dukkha, or the dukkha jnanas, where we begin to see this in a very deep way, and we see it everywhere. Everywhere we turn, we see that there is no lasting happiness here. There is no lasting satisfaction here, because of this ephemeral, impermanent nature of reality. And that leads to this process of, in some ways, becoming disenchanted with everything that's conditioned, with everything that's impermanent. We really get to see that it doesn't matter, how many beautiful moments we have, the beautiful house we live in, the beautiful friends we have, the beautiful relationship we have. This too has this impermanent quality to it. This too is something that will pass. And so in that disenchantment, there's a turning away. The Buddha talked about there's a turning away from what is conditioned, and a turning towards the unconditioned. And this is where, through a deep disenchantment of the conditioned, that there can be this opening to the unconditioned, or to nibbana. So again, I don't want to talk about this too much with all of you, but again, just to say that this was the Buddha's wish for all of us, that that we will all really align with and see dukkha to such a deep degree that we will turn our gaze towards what is unconditioned, what doesn't have dukkha nature, what's not impermanent, and that we all get to experience this very deep letting go and this very deep peace that he called the unconditioned, or nibbana. So it's almost time for us to end this talk today, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the connection between suffering and compassion. The Pali word is karuna, for compassion, and it's because often when we see dukkha in our own hearts and minds, often our immediate reaction is, we may feel self-judgment around it, or we may even feel shame that there is dukkha arising within our own hearts and minds. But actually the heart that's not caught in self-judgment or shame, the heart naturally opens with compassion when there is dukkha. This is a natural response to suffering, is that there is this compassion. So again, there is this invitation for us to hold all the ways that we experience dukkha with this quality of compassion. And in some ways, beginning to really opening to this this aspect of our experience, first of all, can lead to deep insights, and can lead to this process of letting go of all the ways that we suffer. But it can also really grow the capacity of the heart to be very compassionate. So this is a beautiful aspect of relating to dukkha, is that that our heart naturally really starts to grow and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And part of that is when we begin to see again that it's not my personal suffering, but there is dukkha. You know, it's not my dukkha, but there is dukkha, and we're all in the same boat. We all have our own personal versions of dukkha. You know, we really begin to see that you know that compassion is a natural is the best response to this. Compassion can hold all of this, and the heart naturally starts to hold our own dukkha with compassion, but also hold everybody's dukkha with compassion. So this is a beautiful thing that we can really bring into our relationships with other beings, is this more compassionate understanding of ourselves and of each other. So first of all, an invitation to release all the words, release all the thoughts you may have had about the words, or things you're still wondering about, and trusting that you can just let it all go for now. You don't have to hold on to any of it. And then really taking some time to come into your still posture. Not rushing into sitting in an absolutely still posture, or even rushing into closing your eyes. Letting your whole body very gently come into this still meditation practice. Supporting some basic sense of safety, some basic sense of well-being. Taking a moment to just listening into the heart mind right now and seeing if you need to adjust yourself in any way. If there's anything you could do that would support this basic sense of okayness in this moment. And then just opening to the overall experience of body in this moment. Maybe feeling your sit bones connected to the surface you're sitting on. Hands resting in your lap. Spine holding your torso upright. And a gentle invitation to release any unnecessary tension you might be holding. Checking your shoulders, your neck, your jaw. Allowing your body to relax as deeply as possible in this moment. If it feels right for you, you can either stay with this overall experience of the body right now, with all the changing sensations coming and going, If it feels more helpful for you, you could connect with the felt experience of your breath. Breath throughout the body or breath in the belly. Right here, right now. Simple experience of this body sitting here, breathing. You may notice how relatively difficult it is for most of us for this body to sit still and for the mind to just be with the simple experience of body and breath. Part of having a human body and a human mind is that there's inevitably going to be pain that arises in the body when we sit still, or the mind gets restless when we sit still. Can you just recognize this? Oh, this is that dukkha quality. It's not my fault. This is how it is. This body will have its pains and its aches. And this mind also has a hard time resting, being still. So simply softening around this, opening to this, allowing the truth of this. Can we be kind with these human bodies and these human minds? Can we bring compassion to our own experience, knowing that we are not alone? to the best of our abilities, finding some sense of stability with the rhythm of the breath, with the felt sense of the body. Grounding ourselves as much as we can. Inhales and exhales. And the experience of the body with all of its different sensations. And also resisting or releasing any self-judgment, you may have around mind wandering or experiences happening for us. To the best of our ability, welcoming in all of our experiences. Allowing all of it to be here. And if you become aware of ways that you are rejecting or resisting parts of your experience right now, bracing against or cringing around, you may just experiment with just naming it. Oh, this is dukkha. This is what dukkha feels like right now in this moment, in my own experience. Wanting this moment right here, right now, to be different than it is in this moment. And then inviting this quality of kindness and compassion into your experience. Perhaps saying to yourself, oh, this is suffering. I care about this suffering. Releasing any additional layers of resistance, of not liking. Holding yourself, holding what's happening right now. With gentleness and acceptance. It feels right for you these last few minutes of the sit. Appreciating yourself for taking the time this morning to come and sit with the community and to deepen your own practice. And can you feel the goodness of that decision? And perhaps feeling the goodness of being in community with others that are also taking this morning, coming and sitting together.